The yellow school bus was supposed to return by sunset on October 15, 1986, carrying 15 excited fourth graders back from their field trip to the Riverside Nature Preserve in Millfield County, Oregon. The children had spent the day collecting autumn leaves, sketching wildlife, and learning about forest ecosystems under the guidance of their beloved teacher, Mrs. Catherine Brennan, who had organized these educational excursions for over 12 years. At 4:30 p.m., as parents gathered in the Pinecrest Elementary School parking lot with cameras ready to capture their children's muddy shoes and leaf-filled backpacks, the first whispers of concern began to ripple through the crowd. By 5:00 p.m., those whispers had transformed into urgent phone calls to the school district office. By 6:00 p.m., sheriff's deputies were racing toward the nature preserve with sirens wailing through the crisp October air. What they discovered at the Riverside Nature Preserve would launch one of Oregon's most baffling missing persons cases. 15 children and their teacher had simply vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a half-eaten sack lunch and a child's forgotten sweater hanging on a trail marker post. The mystery deepened when investigators realized that the school bus itself was nowhere to be found. Bus number 47, a 1979 International Harvester that had faithfully served the district for 7 years, had disappeared along with everyone aboard. No skid marks on the mountain roads, no reports of accidents, no witnesses who remembered seeing the distinctive yellow vehicle after it left the nature preserve. It was as if the earth had opened up and swallowed them whole. For 39 years, the families of those missing children carried an unbearable weight of not knowing. Birthdays passed unmarked, Christmas presents remained unwrapped, and bedroom doors stayed closed like shrines to interrupted childhoods. The community of Pinecrest, population 8,200, never quite recovered from the trauma of losing an entire classroom in a single afternoon. The case spawned countless theories, from tragic accidents to more sinister explanations. But no amount of investigation could explain how 15 children, one teacher, and a school bus could vanish completely from rural Oregon. What happened to those children would remain one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries, until a construction crew working on a new housing development made a discovery that would finally provide answers to questions that had tormented families and investigators for nearly 4 decades. The truth, buried beneath decades of accumulated earth and forest debris, was more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Before we dive into this chilling case, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell, because here on Cold Case Mysteries, we uncover the stories that others left behind. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Mrs. Catherine Brennan had been planning the October field trip for months, meticulously organizing every detail with the thoroughness that made her Pinecrest Elementary's most requested teacher. At 34, she had dedicated her entire career to making learning an adventure for her students. The Nature Preserve trip was her favorite annual tradition, a chance to take her 4th grade class beyond the confines of their classroom and into the Oregon wilderness that surrounded their small logging community. The 15 children selected for the trip represented a cross-section of Pinecrest's close-knit community. There was Tommy Martinez, age 9, whose father worked at the sawmill and whose mother packed his lunch with extra cookies to share. Sarah Chen, the newest student, had moved to Oregon just 2 months earlier, when her father transferred to manage the local bank branch. Michael Patterson loved dinosaurs and carried a worn field guide in his backpack, hoping to find fossils during their nature walk. Jessica Williams, the class artist, had brought colored pencils to sketch the changing leaves that painted the mountain slopes in brilliant reds and golds. The morning of October 15th dawned clear and crisp, with temperatures perfect for outdoor exploration. Parents gathered at the school at 8:12 a.m. to send off their children, bundling them into warm jackets and reminding them to stay with the group. Bus driver Earl Morrison, a 23-year veteran who knew every winding road in Millfield County, performed his routine safety check while Mrs. Brennan took attendance one final time. The drive to Riverside Nature Preserve should have taken exactly 45 minutes along Highway 26, then north on Forest Service Road 2847 through dense stands of Douglas fir and western hemlock. Earl had made this journey dozens of times, navigating the narrow mountain roads with the careful precision of someone who understood that his most precious cargo was irreplaceable. The preserve itself covered 847 acres of old-growth forest, complete with marked hiking trails, educational displays, and a visitor center where school groups could eat lunch and participate in hands-on learning activities. According to the visitor center's logbook, Bus 47 arrived at 9:15 a.m. right on schedule. Park Ranger David Kowalski remembered greeting the enthusiastic group of children as they tumbled off the bus, their excited chatter echoing through the morning air. Mrs. Brennan had reserved the preserve's outdoor classroom for the entire day, planning activities that would reinforce her students' science lessons about ecosystems, plant identification, and animal habitats. The morning activities proceeded exactly as planned. Ranger Kowalski led the children on a guided nature walk, pointing out native plant species and explaining the interconnected relationships that made the forest ecosystem function. The students collected leaf samples, identified animal tracks in the soft earth beside a creek, and participated in a scavenger hunt that sent them searching for specific types of bark, seeds, and interesting rocks to add to their nature journals. Lunch was served at noon in the preserve's picnic area, a collection of wooden tables situated beneath towering fir trees that filtered the autumn sunlight into dancing patterns on the forest floor. Mrs. Brennan had organized the meal with military precision, ensuring each child had adequate food and water while maintaining the educational focus of their trip. After lunch, the group participated in a forest conservation workshop, learning about the importance of protecting old-growth habitats and the role of responsible logging practices in maintaining healthy ecosystems. At 3:30 p.m., Ranger Kowalski watched Bus 47 pull away from the visitor center parking lot, its diesel engine echoing off the surrounding mountains as Earl Morrison began the return journey to Pinecrest Elementary. The ranger noted the departure time in his daily log, a routine entry that would become crucial evidence in the investigation that followed. As the yellow bus disappeared around the first curve of Forest Service Road 2847, heading back toward civilization, none of the 15 children aboard could have imagined they were beginning a journey that would end in one of Oregon's most enduring mysteries. The first sign something was wrong came at 4:45 p.m. when Principal Robert Hayes called the preserve to inquire about the group's whereabouts. Parents had been gathering in the school parking lot since 4:30 p.m., expecting to collect their children after what should have been an enriching day of outdoor education. Ranger Kowalski assured the principal that the bus had departed on schedule, suggesting they might have encountered minor delays due to construction or wildlife on the narrow mountain roads. By 5:15 p.m., Principal Hayes was calling the Millfield County Sheriff's Department. Deputy Sandra Walsh, who had 3 children of her own at Pinecrest Elementary, understood immediately that this was not a routine inquiry about a late school bus. Earl Morrison had been driving school routes for over 2 decades without a single accident or significant delay. If Bus 47 wasn't back by sunset, something serious had gone wrong. The initial search focused on the most likely scenarios: mechanical breakdown or minor accident along the winding mountain roads between the preserve and town. Deputy Walsh drove the entire route twice, her patrol car's spotlight sweeping the dense forest on both sides of the narrow pavement. Forest Service personnel joined the search, using their intimate knowledge of logging roads and hiking trails to check areas where a disabled bus might have pulled off the main route. As darkness fell over Millfield County, the search expanded to include volunteer firefighters, search and rescue teams, and dozens of parents who refused to wait helplessly while their children remained missing. The command post, established in the preserve's visitor center, buzzed with radio chatter and the desperate energy of people confronting every parent's worst nightmare. Sheriff Margaret Thompson, who had served Millfield County for 18 years, coordinated the expanding search operation with the methodical efficiency of someone who understood that time was the enemy in missing persons cases. The October night temperatures would drop below freezing, creating dangerous conditions for anyone stranded in the wilderness. If the children were injured or lost, every hour of delay reduced their chances of survival. The helicopter from the Oregon State Police arrived at first light on October 16th, its powerful searchlight scanning the dense canopy of evergreen trees that might conceal a yellow school bus. Ground teams worked in systematic patterns, covering every logging road, hiking trail, and creek bed within a 20-mile radius of the preserve. The search area was expanded repeatedly as each sector was cleared without finding any trace of the missing group. The breakthrough that everyone hoped for never came. After 72 hours of intensive searching involving over 200 personnel, the investigation had uncovered absolutely nothing. No skid marks, no debris, no evidence that Bus 47 had ever traveled the route between Riverside Nature Preserve and Pinecrest Elementary School. It was as if the vehicle and everyone aboard had been erased from existence somewhere along those 15 miles of mountain highway. The investigation transformed from a rescue mission into something far more complex and disturbing, as the days stretched into weeks without a single clue. FBI agents arrived from Portland on October 19th, bringing sophisticated equipment and expertise in cases involving missing children. But even federal resources couldn't conjure evidence from thin air. The complete absence of any physical trace defied every protocol and procedure that seasoned investigators had relied upon throughout their careers. Agent Patricia Caldwell, who had worked kidnapping cases across the Pacific Northwest for 12 years, found herself confronting a mystery that challenged her fundamental understanding of how people disappear. Children don't vanish along with their teacher and a school bus without leaving some indication of where they went or what happened to them. Yet the forensic analysis of Forest Service Road 2847 revealed nothing beyond the normal traffic patterns of logging trucks and park service vehicles. The media attention began slowly, with local newspapers covering what initially appeared to be a tragic but explainable accident somewhere in the vast Oregon wilderness. But as days passed without resolution, the story attracted regional television stations, then national news networks drawn by the inexplicable nature of the disappearance. The image of 15 empty desks in Mrs. Brennan's classroom became an iconic photograph that appeared in newspapers across the country, symbolizing a mystery that seemed to mock the very concept of logical explanation. Theories multiplied like wildfire through the community and beyond. Some suggested that Earl Morrison had suffered a medical emergency while driving, causing the bus to crash into one of the deep ravines that carved through the mountainous terrain. Search teams rappelled into every accessible canyon within 50 miles, but the dense forest canopy that might conceal wreckage also made systematic searching nearly impossible. Other theories pointed toward more sinister possibilities, that someone had ambushed the bus along the isolated mountain road, though no ransom demands ever materialized, and no witnesses reported seeing suspicious activity in the area. The families of the missing children existed in a liminal space between hope and despair, unable to grieve properly because there were no bodies to bury, yet unable to maintain normal lives while their children remained somewhere beyond reach. Tommy Martinez's parents kept his bedroom exactly as he'd left it that October morning, his dinosaur posters still decorating the walls, and his baseball glove waiting on the dresser for a game that would never come. Sarah Chen's mother spoke to her daughter's empty bed each night, telling her about the day's events as if the 9-year-old might somehow hear her across the impossible distance that separated them. Michael Patterson's father, a logger who knew the mountain forests better than most, spent his weekends driving logging roads and hiking trails that weren't on any official map. Convinced that his intimate knowledge of the terrain might reveal something that professional searchers had missed, Jessica Williams's art supplies remained scattered across her desk at home, a half-finished drawing of autumn leaves serving as a frozen monument to the moment when childhood had been interrupted by incomprehensible loss. The psychological toll on the surviving community was profound and lasting. Parents who had routinely allowed their children to walk to school alone now drove them door to door, haunted by the recognition that tragedy could strike even the most carefully supervised activities. The annual fall field trips that had been a beloved tradition at Pinecrest Elementary were quietly discontinued, too painful a reminder of what had been lost. Teachers throughout the district found themselves questioning every decision, every outing, every moment, when their students were beyond the immediate safety of the classroom walls. Principal Hayes aged visibly during those first months, his hair turning gray as he fielded calls from desperate parents and increasingly frustrated investigators. The school board meetings became exercises in collective anguish, as community members demanded answers that no one could provide. Some families moved away from Pinecrest entirely, unable to bear living in a place where 15 children had simply evaporated from existence, taking with them the community's sense of security and innocence. The investigation consumed enormous resources as it expanded beyond the immediate search area. Every registered sex offender within 200 miles was questioned and re-questioned. Earl Morrison's background was examined with microscopic intensity, revealing nothing more suspicious than a few speeding tickets and an exemplary safety record. Mrs. Brennan's personal life was dissected by investigators looking for any connection that might explain the disappearance, but she emerged as exactly what she appeared to be: a dedicated teacher beloved by students and respected by colleagues. Psychics and self-proclaimed experts descended upon Millfield County like vultures, offering theories that ranged from alien abduction to underground tunnel systems that supposedly honeycombed the mountain region. Sheriff Thompson found herself spending precious investigative time debunking wild claims and protecting the grieving families from exploitation by people who sought to profit from their tragedy. The case files grew thicker as months turned to years, filled with witness statements that led nowhere, forensic reports that revealed nothing, and photographs of empty spaces where a school bus should have been. Detective Raymond Foster, who inherited the case when the original investigators retired or transferred to other jurisdictions, approached the mystery with fresh eyes but encountered the same impenetrable wall of silence that had frustrated his predecessors. By 1990, 4 years after the disappearance, the active investigation had been quietly scaled back to periodic reviews of the evidence and follow-up on occasional tips that proved as fruitless as all the others. The families continued their private searches, organizing anniversary vigils and maintaining websites that documented their ongoing quest for answers. The story had become part of Oregon folklore, discussed in hushed tones around campfires and referenced in documentaries about unsolved mysteries. The 20th anniversary in 2006 brought renewed media attention and a fresh review of the evidence using updated forensic techniques. But DNA analysis of trace materials found along the route yielded no new insights. Ground-penetrating radar was employed to search areas where the bus might have been buried, but the technology revealed only the natural geological features that characterized the mountainous terrain. Local high school students began writing the research papers about the case, interviewing surviving family members and retired investigators in attempts to uncover overlooked clues or inconsistencies in the official record. These academic exercises, while well-intentioned, only emphasized how thoroughly the mystery had resisted decades of professional investigation. The children who had been classmates of the missing students grew up carrying the weight of survivors' guilt, wondering why they hadn't been selected for that particular field trip. Many left Pinecrest after graduation, seeking lives unburdened by the constant reminder of friends who had vanished during what should have been an ordinary school day. As the 30th anniversary approached in 2016, the case had taken on an almost mythical quality, discussed in the same breath as other famous disappearances that had never been satisfactorily explained. The families, now elderly and worn down by decades of uncertainty, had begun to accept that they might never learn what happened to their children. The investigation remained technically open, but Detective Foster acknowledged privately that barring some extraordinary discovery, the truth would likely remain buried with whatever evidence existed. The construction crew from Millfield Development Corporation had been working the site since early March 2025, clearing forest land for a new subdivision that would bring much-needed housing to the growing region. The project required extensive excavation to level the sloping terrain and install utility infrastructure, work that progressed steadily through the wet Oregon spring. On April 8th, heavy equipment operator Jake Sullivan was using a backhoe to dig drainage trenches when his bucket struck something metallic buried approximately 12 feet below the surface. What he initially dismissed as an old septic tank or buried debris soon revealed itself as something far more significant and disturbing: the rusted roof of what appeared to be a large vehicle, completely entombed in decades of accumulated earth and forest debris. Sullivan immediately shut down his equipment and called his supervisor, Mike Rodriguez, who arrived within minutes to examine what appeared to be the outline of a substantial vehicle buried beneath layers of compacted soil, fallen leaves, and the accumulated detritus of nearly 4 decades. The metallic surface bore traces of yellow paint that had somehow survived its underground entombment, and both men felt a chill of recognition as they realized what they might have discovered. Rodriguez contacted the Millfield County Sheriff's Department at 11:47 a.m., his voice tight with the understanding that this construction site had just become something far more significant than a housing development. Detective Foster, now 58 years old and carrying the weight of the unsolved case like a personal burden, arrived at the scene within an hour, accompanied by the county coroner and a team of forensic investigators who had been waiting nearly 4 decades for this moment. The excavation process required painstaking precision to preserve whatever evidence might remain intact after so many years underground. County archaeologists were called in to supervise the careful removal of soil and debris, treating the burial site with the same meticulous attention typically reserved for ancient artifacts. Every shovel full of earth was sifted through mesh screens, searching for personal items or human remains that might have been scattered during the decades of natural burial. As more of the vehicle's outline emerged from its earthen tomb, the distinctive shape and size confirmed what everyone already suspected but had been afraid to voice aloud. This was Bus 47, the international harvester that had carried 15 children and their teacher into the Oregon wilderness on October 15, 1986, never to return. The discovery site was located 7 miles from Forest Service Road 2847, deep in old-growth forest that had shown no signs of disturbance during the original search operations. The bus rested in what appeared to be a natural depression that had been deliberately enlarged and camouflaged with remarkable skill. The surrounding terrain showed evidence of careful landscaping designed to conceal the burial site from aerial observation, with native vegetation planted in patterns that would appear natural to searchers but effectively obscured the ground beneath. Whoever had orchestrated this concealment possessed intimate knowledge of forestry techniques and search procedures. Dr. Angela Martinez, the state forensic anthropologist, supervised the delicate process of accessing the bus's interior without compromising potential evidence. The vehicle's windows had long since shattered under the pressure of accumulated earth, and the interior was filled with decades of soil and organic matter that had filtered through every available opening. The excavation team worked with brushes and small tools, carefully removing the debris while photographing every stage of the process. The first human remains were discovered on April 12th, 4 days into the excavation. The skeletal remains of what appeared to be an adult, positioned in the driver's seat, were consistent with Earl Morrison's physical description according to dental records that had been preserved in the case files. The position of the remains suggested that Morrison had died at the wheel, though determining the exact cause of death after nearly 4 decades would prove challenging for forensic pathologists. The discovery of the children's remains followed a pattern that would haunt investigators for months to come. Each small skeleton was found in a seated position, as if the children had remained in their assigned seats during whatever catastrophic event had befallen the bus. The preservation of clothing fragments, personal items, and even some organic materials was remarkably good due to the anaerobic conditions created by the deep burial and clay-rich soil composition. Personal items began emerging from the excavation like artifacts from a time capsule of interrupted childhood. Tommy Martinez's worn field guide was recovered from what had been his backpack, its pages fused together by moisture but still recognizable by the distinctive dinosaur illustrations on the cover. Sarah Chen's colored pencils, still in their metal tin, were found near what had been her seat, the bright colors somehow surviving their underground imprisonment. Michael Patterson's baseball cards, carefully protected in plastic sleeves, remained legible despite the passage of time. The forensic team's most disturbing discovery came when they examined the bus's emergency exits and found that several had been welded shut from the outside. The rear emergency door showed clear signs of metalwork that had been performed after the vehicle's manufacture, effectively trapping anyone inside during an emergency. The side windows that normally could be opened had been secured with metal brackets that prevented them from moving, creating what amounted to a mobile tomb. Evidence of deliberate tampering extended throughout the vehicle. The radio equipment that should have allowed Earl Morrison to communicate with the school district had been disabled, with crucial wires cut and communication components removed entirely. The bus's engine showed signs of mechanical sabotage designed to cause failure at a predetermined time, suggesting that whoever orchestrated this tragedy had planned every detail with meticulous precision. Dr. Martinez's preliminary examination of the remains suggested that death had occurred relatively quickly after the bus had been buried, likely due to carbon monoxide poisoning from the still-running engine in the sealed environment. The positioning of the victims indicated they had remained conscious long enough to understand their predicament, but had been unable to escape from their underground prison. The burial site itself revealed the work of someone with extensive knowledge of heavy equipment operation and forest management. Soil analysis indicated that the earth used to cover the bus had been transported from multiple locations to avoid creating obvious disturbances that might attract attention during the initial search operations. The perpetrator had used a combination of natural terrain features and artificial landscaping to create a burial site that could remain undetected for decades. Tree core samples from the forest surrounding the burial site provided a timeline of when the excavation and reburial had occurred. Several mature Douglas firs showed growth patterns consistent with root system disruption during late 1986, followed by recovery patterns that suggested the area had been left undisturbed for the subsequent 38 years. The perpetrator had even replanted native vegetation in patterns that would mature into natural-appearing forest coverage. Detective Foster found himself confronting evidence of a crime that surpassed anything in his 35-year career in terms of premeditation and calculated cruelty. The level of planning required to execute such an elaborate scheme suggested someone with professional expertise in both heavy equipment operation and forest management. Someone who understood search and rescue procedures well enough to anticipate and counter them effectively. The investigation team expanded to include FBI specialists in cases involving mass murder and elaborate concealment schemes. Agent Patricia Caldwell, now retired but called back as a consultant due to her familiarity with the original case, reviewed the new evidence with the grim satisfaction of someone who had waited decades for answers, even answers as horrific as these. The forensic examination of Bus 47's mechanical systems revealed a sophisticated sabotage scheme designed to cause engine failure at a specific location along the planned route. The perpetrator had installed a device that would cause the fuel system to malfunction after precisely the amount of driving time required to reach the predetermined burial site. This level of mechanical knowledge and planning indicated someone with professional automotive or heavy equipment experience. Personal items recovered from the burial site painted a heartbreaking picture of the children's final moments. Jessica Williams's art supplies were found scattered around her seat, including a half-finished sketch of autumn leaves that she had apparently been working on during the bus ride. Several children had been eating snacks from their lunch boxes when tragedy struck, their partially consumed sandwiches and fruit preserved by the unique burial conditions. Mrs. Brennan's lesson plans for the following week were discovered in her teacher's bag, including detailed notes about activities she had planned based on the nature preserve field trip. Her gradebook contained careful observations about each student's progress and learning objectives that would never be completed. The documentation of her dedication to education made her death, along with that of her students, seem even more senseless and tragic. The crime scene analysis revealed that the perpetrator had spent considerable time at the burial site both before and after the actual interment of the bus. Soil samples contained traces of cigarette ash and food residue that suggested someone had maintained surveillance of the area during the burial process. The methodical nature of the concealment work indicated that the perpetrator had worked at the site for several days or even weeks to achieve such thorough camouflage. Tool marks on the bus's exterior provided crucial evidence about the equipment used in the crime. The welding work that had sealed the emergency exits showed characteristics consistent with professional-grade equipment, and the metal cutting used to disable the radio had been performed with precision tools rather than crude implements. These details suggested someone with access to a well-equipped workshop and extensive metalworking experience. The discovery of Bus 47 and its tragic cargo marked the end of one mystery but the beginning of another, even more disturbing investigation. Who possessed the knowledge, equipment, and psychological capacity to orchestrate such an elaborate and horrific crime? The answer would require investigators to examine not just the physical evidence from the burial site, but the deeper question of what kind of person could plan and execute the deliberate murder of 15 children and their beloved teacher. The forensic reconstruction of the crime revealed a perpetrator who had studied every aspect of the October 15th field trip with obsessive attention to detail. Phone records from the months preceding the disappearance showed multiple calls to Riverside Nature Preserve inquiring about school group schedules and procedures. Someone had been gathering intelligence about the timing, route, and logistics of educational field trips with the methodical precision of a military operation. The breakthrough in identifying their suspect came from an unexpected source: employment records from the Millfield County Road Department. Cross-referencing personnel files with the specialized knowledge required to execute such an elaborate crime led investigators to Harold Hal Weston, a 43-year-old heavy equipment operator who had worked for the county since 1979. Weston possessed every skill necessary for the crime: professional experience with excavation equipment, welding certification, intimate knowledge of Forest Service roads, and access to the tools and machinery required to bury a school bus 12 feet underground. What made Weston's profile even more compelling was his connection to the original search operation. As a county employee, he had been assigned to the search teams that scoured the mountains looking for Bus 47 during those first desperate weeks after the disappearance. He had spent days driving Forest Service roads with search coordinators, ostensibly helping to locate the missing children while knowing exactly where they were buried. The psychological audacity required to participate in searching for victims he had murdered demonstrated a level of calculated cruelty that stunned even seasoned investigators. Detective Foster's team discovered that Weston had taken 3 weeks of vacation time immediately following the October 15th disappearance, claiming he needed to help his elderly mother with home repairs in distant Medford. Investigation revealed that his mother had died 2 years earlier, and property records showed no connection to any address in Medford. The false alibi provided the perfect cover for the extensive work required to conceal the burial site and establish the elaborate camouflage that had hidden it from detection for nearly 4 decades. Bank records from 1986 showed suspicious cash withdrawals from Weston's accounts during September and October, totaling nearly $8,000, a substantial sum for a county equipment operator whose annual salary was less than $22,000. The money had been withdrawn in small amounts over several weeks, suggesting careful planning to avoid attracting attention from financial institutions. Investigators theorized that the cash had been used to purchase materials and rent equipment necessary for the burial operation. The most disturbing aspect of the investigation emerged when forensic psychologists analyzed the crime's elaborate nature and extended timeline. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to victim Sarah Chen, a specialist in criminal psychology at Portland State University, concluded that the perpetrator had derived psychological satisfaction not just from the murders themselves, but from the prolonged suffering of the families and community. The careful concealment that prevented closure and healing represented a form of extended torture that continued the crime's impact for decades. Weston's neighbors from the 1980s, when re-interviewed, recalled subtle behavioral changes in the weeks following the disappearance. Margaret Rodriguez, who lived 3 houses down from Weston's modest rental property, remembered that he had seemed unusually energetic and talkative during the search period, volunteering information about forest areas that should be examined and offering theories about what might have happened to the missing group. His apparent helpfulness had masked what investigators now understood was the killer's need to insert himself into the investigation and maintain control over the narrative. The psychological profile that emerged painted a picture of a man driven by deep resentment toward the community he served but felt excluded from. Weston had never married, lived alone, and had few social connections despite working for the county for over 7 years by 1986. Co-workers described him as competent but odd, someone who seemed to harbor grudges over minor slights and perceived disrespect from supervisors and fellow employees. Employment records revealed a pattern of disciplinary actions against Weston for inappropriate behavior around school children during his road maintenance duties. In 1984, he had been reported for lingering near Pinecrest Elementary during lunch recess, claiming to be checking on nearby road construction, but spending excessive time watching children play. A formal complaint from Principal Hayes had resulted in a written reprimand and orders to avoid unnecessary contact with school property during student hours. The investigation uncovered evidence that Weston had been planning the crime for at least 2 years before executing it. Hardware store receipts from 1984 and 1985 showed purchases of welding equipment, metal cutting tools, and industrial supplies that matched the materials used to modify Bus 47. The purchases had been made at different stores throughout the region, suggesting deliberate efforts to avoid creating a suspicious pattern at any single location. Most chilling was the discovery of detailed surveillance notes in Weston's Han residence. The notes documented the schedules of various school activities, the routes taken by Dreiting, found hidden in a toolbox at his former different bus drivers, and specific observations about Mrs. Brennan's feel of a predator, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. The notes' trip preparations. He had been studying his intended victims with the patience revealed that Weston had considered several different scenarios before settling on the Nature Preserve field trip as his target. He had initially planned to intercept a bus during a routine route, but realized that the regular schedule would be quickly noticed and would trigger an immediate search of well-traveled roads. The field trip offered the perfect combination of isolation, delayed discovery and a reasonable explanation for why the bus might not return on schedule. Forensic analysis of Weston's personal vehicle from the 1980s, a pickup truck that had been sold and resold multiple times, eventually yielded trace evidence linking him to the burial site. Paint samples from the truck's bed matched soil composition from the area where Bus 47 had been concealed, providing physical evidence that connected Weston to the location during the relevant time period. The timeline reconstruction showed that Weston had intercepted Bus 47 approximately 3 miles from the nature preserve, at a location where the Forest Service road curved around a natural blind spot that prevented observation from either direction. He had likely forced Earl Morrison to drive to the predetermined burial site at gunpoint, then executed his plan to seal the victims inside the bus before covering it with earth using county equipment that he had borrowed during his vacation period. Witness testimony from other county employees revealed that Weston had been seen using heavy equipment during his supposed vacation time, claiming to be helping with an emergency road repair project. The equipment logs had been altered to conceal the unauthorized usage, but careful examination of maintenance records revealed discrepancies that proved the machinery had been operated during times when Weston should have been in Medford, caring for his fictitious elderly mother. The investigation team discovered that Weston had methodically destroyed most evidence of his involvement over the years following the crime. His rental property from 1986 had been thoroughly cleaned and modified before he moved to a different address in 1988. Neighbors recalled that he had burned large quantities of personal belongings in his backyard during the spring of 1987, claiming to be clearing out accumulated junk, but likely destroying documents and materials that could link him to the murders. However, Weston's compulsive need to document his activities had proven to be his downfall. Hidden compartments in his workshop contained photographs of the burial site during various stages of the concealment process, apparently kept as trophies of his successful deception. The images showed the systematic nature of his work and provided investigators with visual evidence of how the elaborate camouflage had been achieved. The photographs also revealed that Weston had visited the burial site multiple times over the years, apparently to ensure that his concealment work remained effective. Several images were dated from the 1990s and 2000s, showing him making minor adjustments to the vegetation and terrain to maintain the natural appearance that had fooled searchers for so many years. Dr. Martinez's analysis of the burial site's construction revealed engineering principles that went far beyond amateur grave digging. Weston had created a sophisticated drainage system to prevent water accumulation that might cause ground subsidence and reveal the location. He had also installed barriers to prevent tree roots from penetrating the burial chamber, ensuring that the site would remain stable and undetectable for decades. The level of planning extended to considerations about seasonal changes and natural forest succession. Weston had planted specific species of trees and undergrowth that would mature quickly to create dense canopy coverage, while selecting varieties that wouldn't grow large enough to require commercial logging that might disturb the site. His knowledge of forestry practices had been applied with the same meticulous attention to detail that characterized every aspect of the crime. Perhaps the most disturbing discovery was evidence that Weston had considered the possibility of eventually revealing his crime. Among his personal effects, investigators found detailed maps marking the burial location and written instructions for locating the site, apparently prepared as a form of insurance or final confession. The document suggested that he had always planned to eventually claim credit for his elaborate deception, perhaps viewing the revelation as the ultimate demonstration of his superiority over law enforcement and the community that had failed to appreciate his intelligence. The investigation revealed that Harold Weston had died in 2019 at age 76, taking his secrets to the grave just 6 years before construction workers would accidentally uncover his carefully concealed crime. He had lived quietly in a trailer park outside Bend, Oregon, working odd jobs and maintaining minimal contact with anyone who might remember his connection to Millfield County. His death from natural causes meant that he would never face justice for the murders that had traumatized an entire community for nearly 4 decades. The discovery of Weston's death created a bitter irony that would haunt the families of the victims forever. After decades of searching for answers, they had finally learned the truth about their children's fate, only to realize that the man responsible had lived peacefully for 33 years after committing his horrific crime. He had worked ordinary jobs, paid his taxes, and blended seamlessly into society while 15 families endured decades of torment and uncertainty about their missing loved ones. Detective Foster found himself confronting the hollow satisfaction of a solved case where justice could never be served. The evidence against Weston was overwhelming and conclusive, but the grave had claimed him before handcuffs ever could. The families would have their answers, but they would never have their day in court, never hear a confession, never see the man who had destroyed their lives face the consequences of his calculated cruelty. The psychological evaluation of Weston's remaining personal effects revealed the mind of a methodical killer who had derived satisfaction not just from the murders themselves, but from the ongoing deception that followed. Dr. Chen's analysis of his private writings suggested that Weston had monitored news coverage of the case over the years, collecting newspaper clippings and television reports about the anniversary vigils and renewed search efforts. He had apparently taken pleasure in watching the community struggle with questions he could have answered at any time. Among Weston's possessions, investigators discovered a detailed journal documenting his thoughts and observations during the years following the murders. The entries revealed a man obsessed with his own cleverness, who viewed the unsolved case as proof of his intellectual superiority over law enforcement and the general public. He had written extensively about the various theories that emerged over the years, often expressing amusement at how far investigators had strayed from the truth. The journal entries from the first anniversary in 1987 showed particular cruelty in Weston's observations about the grieving families. He had attended the memorial service at Pinecrest Elementary, standing among the mourners while secretly reveling in the pain he had caused. His writings described the expressions of loss on parents' faces with clinical detachment, as if he were studying specimens in a laboratory rather than witnessing the human cost of his actions. More disturbing still were Weston's detailed observations about the investigation's progress over the years. He had apparently maintained contact with former county colleagues who provided him with inside information about search efforts and evidence analysis. The journal revealed his growing confidence as years passed without detection, and his increasing belief that he had committed the perfect crime that would never be solved. The forensic team's analysis of the burial site continued to reveal new evidence of Weston's elaborate planning and execution. Soil core samples showed that he had conducted test excavations at the location months before the actual crime, apparently experimenting with different burial depths and drainage configurations to ensure the site would remain stable and undetectable. The precision of his work suggested someone who had approached mass murder with the same methodical attention to detail that others might apply to legitimate engineering projects. Chemical analysis of soil samples revealed traces of industrial sealants and waterproofing materials that Weston had used to prevent ground subsidence that might reveal the burial location. He had essentially created an underground vault designed to contain the bus and its tragic cargo for decades without detection. The sophistication of the construction explained why ground-penetrating radar searches during the 1990s had failed to locate the site. Weston's engineering had created a sealed chamber that didn't register as an anomaly to the technology available at the time. The investigation team discovered that Weston had spent considerable time studying search and rescue procedures, apparently to understand how to counter the techniques that would be used to locate his victims. Library records from the 1980s showed that he had checked out numerous books about wilderness survival, search patterns, and forensic investigation methods. He had educated himself about his adversaries with the thoroughness of a military strategist planning a campaign. Even more chilling was evidence that Weston had considered expanding his crimes beyond the single bus incident. Among his papers were detailed observations about other school activities and transportation schedules, suggesting that he had viewed the Nature Preserve murders as a prototype for additional attacks. Only his apparent satisfaction with the elaborate deception he had achieved seemed to have prevented him from claiming more victims. The personal belongings recovered from Bus 47 continued to provide heartbreaking insights into the children's final moments. Forensic preservation had maintained many organic materials that normally would have decomposed, creating a time capsule that documented the ordinary details of their interrupted lives. Lunch boxes contained sandwiches with bites still visible. Homework assignments showed careful handwriting that would never be graded, and personal notes between friends revealed the innocent concerns and friendships of fourth-grade students. Mrs. Brennan's teaching materials painted a picture of an educator who had planned every aspect of the field trip with loving attention to her students' educational experience. Her lesson plans included follow-up activities based on observations the children would make during their nature walk, discussion questions about forest ecosystems, and creative writing assignments inspired by their outdoor adventure. The tragedy was magnified by the realization that she had been planning to transform their field trip experience into weeks of meaningful learning that would never occur. The forensic anthropologist's examination of the remains provided crucial evidence about the timeline of events after the bus had been buried. The positioning of the victims suggested that they had survived for a significant period in their underground prison, likely succumbing to carbon monoxide poisoning as the engine continued running in the sealed environment. The horror of their situation was compounded by evidence that they had attempted to escape, with scratch marks on the welded emergency exits showing desperate efforts to break free from their tomb. The excavation of Bus 47 finally brought closure to a mystery that had haunted Millfield County for 39 years. But that closure came at a price too terrible to calculate. 15 children who should have grown up to become teachers, parents, and pillars of their community had instead become victims of one man's calculated cruelty. Mrs. Catherine Brennan, who had dedicated her life to nurturing young minds, had died alongside the students she had sworn to protect. Harold Weston's death in 2019 meant that justice in its traditional form would never be served. The families who had endured decades of not knowing would never hear him confess, never see him led away in handcuffs, never witness the moment when he finally faced consequences for the unthinkable crime he had committed with such methodical precision. Yet, in uncovering the truth, investigators had accomplished something that seemed impossible for nearly 4 decades. They had brought Tommy, Sarah, Michael, Jessica, and their 11 classmates home. The discovery of Bus 47 stands as a stark reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary facades, that the person living next door or working at the county office might harbor secrets too dark to imagine. Weston had walked among the grieving families at memorial services, had helped search for children he had murdered, had maintained his deception with a coldness that defied human understanding. For the families of Pinecrest Elementary's lost 4th-grade class, the revelation brought both relief and renewed anguish. They finally knew what had happened to their children, but they also learned that their loved ones had suffered in ways too horrible to fully comprehend. The empty bedrooms that had been maintained as shrines could finally become memorials, but the parents who had waited 39 years for answers were now elderly, their own lives forever altered by a truth that arrived too late for complete healing. The case serves as testament to the dedication of investigators like Detective Foster, who carried the weight of unsolved tragedy for decades, and to the power of science and persistence in eventually illuminating even the darkest secrets. Sometimes the truth takes 39 years to surface, buried 12 feet underground in an Oregon forest, waiting for a construction crew to accidentally disturb the careful work of a killer who thought he had committed the perfect crime. In the end, Harold Weston's elaborate deception failed in the most fundamental way. The truth emerged, his victims were found, and his legacy became not one of criminal genius, but of a coward who targeted children and died believing he had escaped justice. The children of Pinecrest Elementary were finally home, and their memory would endure long after their killer's name was forgotten.